is it?
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it?
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it? I'm the Doctor. Only joking.
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it?
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it?
I'm the Doctor.
Only joking.
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it?
Small off-duty Czechoslovakian traffic warden.
So what is it?
I'm the Doctor.
Only joking.
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it?
I'm the Doctor.
Alright, dudes, it's time for another episode of It's Time to Rewind. I'm known as Bubbawheat. Not the Bubbawheat, not first name Bubba, last name Wheat, just Bubbawheat. This season is Red Who, where I am covering some British sci-fi and, most specifically Red Dwarf and Doctor Who. And joining me 3 million years from the future via the TARDIS is my guest Fergus from Better Than Life. How are you doing today?
Bubba, it's amazing to be here. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I'm really good, thank you. Excited to talk about this quirky, weird British sci-fi sitcom that I'm amazed that anyone in the States has heard of.
Yeah, I'm surprised. Before we jump into that, I do want to share a little milestone because I tend to miss these, but I happen to catch it. But this is my 200th episode of this podcast.
Hey, congratulations! What an honor. Thank you. Oh my gosh, I'm genuinely honored to be here for this auspicious occasion, your bicentennial. Wow.
Yeah, it's been great these past 5 seasons of talking time loops, and I was also surprised. We'll get to it whenever we get into the episode, but I picked this because it was kind of timey-wimey, and I didn't realize I had forgotten until watching it that there is a small actual time loop in this episode, so it's perfect that we are covering this one from the first series.
I could argue that the science kind of says it's one massive time loop that kind of diminishes as the episode goes on. But like you say, let's get into that when we get into it.
And before that, this is, we're talking about Future Echoes, which is the second episode of the first series of Red Dwarf, and it originally aired February 22nd, 1988, but since this is the first episode of Red Dwarf that I'm covering on this series, I did want to talk a little bit about my history with this show. And like you said, how I discovered this show in the States, which, I talked a little bit about it last week about, bringing up some memories I had of catching a couple random Tom Baker episodes of Doctor Who on PBS. So
PBS, of course.
Yeah, so our public access station, our public broadcasting, whenever I was growing up, I was in central Illinois, and, we did have cable relatively early on, but there still wasn't a ton of stations at that time. So I would occasionally flip through looking for something to watch and happen onto PBS. And they would air British shows on there from time to time. I guess the licensing was cheap, and they thought that it was educational in some way. And I don't know how, but I happened across an episode of Red Dwarf, and I don't remember exactly which one it was. I do have some vague memories because this was something that I didn't know when it aired specifically. I would just happen to catch it, and usually it would be like kind of in the middle of the episode. And so I had no idea why Rimmer had an H on his head. I thought I didn't know that Smeg was a made-up future swear word. I thought I'm pretty sure that I initially thought that Smeg was just standard British slang.
All right. No, I'm afraid not.
Yeah, and like I said, I don't remember exactly which episodes. I do remember Female Holly, so I would have caught an episode from Series 3. And I do remember the scene with, I believe it's Series 7 or 8, because I remember seeing the scene with them putting the mops on their head and the fake teeth as they were, trying to hide, sneak around and, being the Dibleys. I definitely remember seeing that scene from that episode. But other than that, it was many years later, whenever I just happened across this Red Dwarf on DVD at a store, and I was like, Red Dwarf, I remember that show. I remember really enjoying that show, and I collected a lot of DVDs. So of course I started with series 1, and it was like a completely different show.
It's very, very different, and the amount of setup just in that first episode. I don't believe there's a way you can jump into the episode we're going to be talking about, not having seen the pilot, and understand what on earth is happening. Why is this guy so angry about a dog on board the ship? Why, as you say, does that man have an H on his head? And what does Smeg mean? So yeah, there's a lot of mysteries, all laid out by that first episode.
Yeah, and even from the DVD, I fell in love with it, and I started collecting the DVDs. I went through, it was kind of a slow process. I think I would, it would be a few months between purchases, because at the time I remember, I believe they were relatively expensive. I want to say they were like $30 for 6 episodes, which...
Oh, yeah, no, that's a lot.
Yeah.
In old money, that's like $1 million now.
Yeah, basically, that's like $50 a season. But I did collect, and I still have series 1 through 6 on DVD. And and then recently, last fall, I noticed that it was streaming on Tubi here, which unfortunately it isn't anymore. So
they took it off.
If you're in the U.S., good luck finding it, because I don't believe it's streaming anywhere right now, at least not for free. But I went through and I binged the entire series, start to finish.
Ooh. Oh, my days.
I mean, it took me a few months. I wasn't, it wasn't like a fast binge. And surprisingly, based on what I read, I feel like I'm one of the few people that I really enjoyed Back to Earth.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm someone that likes the meta humor, even some of the classic shows like Hercules: The Legendary Journeys. One of my favorite episodes was whenever they would, jump into the real world and pretend they were actors playing Hercules, and a lot of fantasy shows had one of those episodes. And so yeah, I really enjoyed that, and I really enjoyed the later seasons. I thought that Skipper was a fantastic episode to end, even though, they are filming another new series here, so that's Skipper won't be the final one.
Well, they did Promised Land as well after.
Oh yeah,
Skipper, I'm not sure. Yeah, so they're just going to keep.
But Promised Land I didn't. Promised Land I didn't like.
Oh, okay.
So
we can talk about why. I don't know. How much do you want to concentrate on this one episode specifically, and how much would you like your listeners to have a bit of a background on? Because I can talk about what you've just said for hours. So.
Well, I think I want to keep this episode kind of maintained to the first series at least. I will give you, right now an opportunity to talk about your background with the show. So,
okay.
You can touch on your thoughts on some of those later seasons before we really dive into this episode.
Sure.
So how did you jump into this series?
I have such a clear memory of it still. It was February 15th, 1988. I was a young kid, and I remember staying up a little late. I think I maybe saw a trailer for the show, and it wasn't sold as a comedy at all in the UK. The trailer, the entirety of the teaser on TV was just a shot of the ship, which is an incredibly ugly, gnarly-looking, city-sized blob floating through space. And that was pretty much it. And for some reason, I thought to myself, yep, that's my thing. I have to see that. And stayed up past my bedtime on that night and had my brain rewired. From the start of the first scene, the so much going on. It was on board a city-sized spaceship. So straight away, 9-year-old me was like, oh my gosh, this is I want to live there. But it's also dingy. It's also that used universe that the makers of Red Dwarf, I think, heavily borrowed from Ridley Scott's Alien, to kind of have the idea of sort of just truckers in space in this weird kind of corporate pseudo-military complex to it, where everyone has ranks, even though they're miners, essentially. They're space miners. The fact that half the principal cast was people of colour, black guys. Like, in the UK, that was pretty unheard of. You'd have specific minority programming, you'd have diverse casting, but for a flagship show, sitcom, sci-fi, for the lead, not just the lead, sorry, the last human being alive to be a man of colour, like that was it was all just so intriguing. It just rewired my brain. I was brought up on, I love comedy, but I was brought up on Fawlty Towers and Blackadder, very wordy, regulated, intellectual, posh, white sitcoms, right? And to see this thing that was about scuzzy morons floating through space. And then in the first episode, you meet, 10, 12, 20 characters. They all die. They all die. 2/3 of the way through the episode, and you suddenly realize, oh no, this isn't about a city-sized spaceship. This is about, to sum it up quickly for your listeners, there's a radiation leak on board the ship that wipes out everyone except this one dude who was put into stasis as a punishment. And when he's let out of stasis, the ship's computer has to decide how long to keep him in stasis to protect him from the radiation. And he's let out 3 million years later. And I think his reaction to coming out, 3 million years, I've still got that library book, which is, to me, a summation of Britishness and the British sense of humour. Like, of all the things that guy can react to, of all the things that Lister can say about suddenly being isolated, about suddenly being the last human, about suddenly being humanity's last hope, it's, oh no, I'm going to get fined if I ever get home. And funny enough, I'm so sorry, my cat has just stood in the camera. She knows where the camera is. I'm sorry, she will move in a second. Funnily enough, they did do an American remake, and I cited I've talked about it many times, talking about Red Dwarf in the past. They kept that joke in the American version, but instead of it being, I've still got that library book, it was, my baseball cards are going to be worth a fortune, which is a really different joke, right? It's like the British version is, oh no, something negative's happened to me. I'm going to think of something more negative that can be the icing on the cake to that. Whereas the American version, the US version was, oh no, something horrible's happened, but actually I stand to win some money out of it. And it's just, it was interesting to me as a kid to see that difference between transatlantic senses of humor. And so, back to your point, I stuck with it. I fell in love with Rob Grant and Doug Naylor, the two writers. I think when they are in a room together, they are brilliant. And just the characters, the extremity of the characters that we still love is down to the performance and the writing. The themes that come up. There is a timey-wimey, sci-fi, crazy, philosophical, psychological element to every episode, which is amazing. Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the sci-fi was very accurate for the time too. Like even something that's not explained, but I have read about is the ship's like propulsion and how it's powered. It has this hydrogen scoop. Like that cage thing on the front is actually something that is intended to collect hydrogen particles from space, and that helps power the ship's engines. And
it's essentially an enormous worm. It is an enormous worm floating through space that devours things with its maw, hydrogen and ions. I think it's an ionized cage is the idea. And then the fuel processing happens in the core of the ship. It's a clever thing. It's a clever way of heating a city-sized spaceship, to have the core, the energy core in its center going all the way through it, the cylinder. And it's basically just, not to be too crude, but, farting out the waste the other end. It's a little space snake, a little space slug. But yeah, it's not pretty. None of it's pretty. That might be another reason why it wasn't that successful in America. I think you guys are very used to seeing like Friends is there's some good looking people on that show. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And even like on the sci-fi side of things, you have Star Trek: The Next Generation, which
for sure.
That's very sleek and highly optimistic. Like what you were saying versus the library book against the baseball cards. Star Trek is very optimistic sci-fi.
That's very true. Well, I'd be intrigued to know whether or not you think Doctor Who is optimistic or not, or cynical.
That's something that I haven't thought about, and I'm not as well versed in Doctor Who. I talked a little bit about it last week, but I've really only watched like two seasons, the first 2 seasons of the initial reboots. So Eccleston and Tennant, and then I'm going through that one just one arc at a time. So I've also seen the Time Meddler was the first one that I did with William Hartnell's Doctor. Yeah,
that's old now. That show. But it's interesting. I think it depends on the Doctor, which iteration of the Doctor you're getting, and that kind of informs the whole show. Tennant, I think, is an optimistic Doctor, but he just is given reason, as you'll find out as you carry on watching it. He's given reason to get angrier and angrier and angrier and angrier as his tenure as the Doctor goes on, until it's quite a cool arc for him. He turns from a bouncy kind of, hey, yeah, let's go, cowabunga, let's do stuff, into a rage machine, basically. It's cool, and it's fun that sci-fi shows can do that. The theme of Red Dwarf, that the cast of Red Dwarf are very often very angry and frustrated, because that's an element of sci-fi that I've not seen anywhere else, is the idea, and it's a very late 80s, early 90s idea, I think, that technology is advancing through the prism of corporate idealism and capitalism, say. I'm not going to go on about that whole politics stuff. Let's keep it nice. But but I think the writers of Red Dwarf were making the point that yes, technology is going to advance, but it's not going to be as helpful as you think.
Yeah, I think they did a good job of addressing that. We won't talk about it too much, but in one of the more recent series with the JMC, whenever it takes over the corporate JMC.
Yeah, it's even got Corp in the title of that episode, hasn't it? But even this episode, way back when, from February '88, that we're about to talk about, I think the episode starts with exactly this theme.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and jump into this episode of Future Echoes. And
amazing.
And I did read that this wasn't initially going to be the second episode. I forget which one was going to be the second episode, but they thought that this was the strongest episode of the back 5. And so they wanted to put this next to kind of have a high point out. Not that the pilot is a bad episode. It's a perfect setup, but it is setup.
Yes, absolutely. And I think this is a really good episode to come second. The pilot is a way of saying this is the tone, this is what's happened, this is where we've got to. The second episode of any series then is going to be, so what do we do now? The second episode of any series has to lay out, that's the real template, right, for the action going forward. Because pilots are, like you say, there's a lot of setting up to do. We're meeting a lot of characters, we're understanding why characters exist. So that already by episode 2, we're hitting the ground running. You don't need too many explanations. I do
hit the ground running literally with Rimmer coming in.
Yeah, quite. Although I suspect he wasn't running until he came around the corner in that corridor.
Both the actor and the character too.
Oh yeah, for sure. I don't believe Rimmer would break a sweat. Also, he's a hologram, so he cannot break a sweat. It's almost redundant him exercising, really. It's just, I think the only reason he's doing it is so that he can compare himself to Lister and call Lister a slob, because that's what makes him happy.
Yeah, it's Rimmer is kind of like the reverse Matrix, where he is.
That's true. That's brilliant. Yeah, but the episode, I just love that this episode starts before the timey-wimey stuff kicks off proper. It starts with a reiteration of character and a reiteration of the world with Lister. All he's trying to do is get a cup of hot soup out of a vending machine. These vending machines are supposed to be able to give you anything. And the very first thing that happens is this vending machine has a speech impediment. I'm not sure we'd make that joke these days. I'm sure they would have found a different kind of weird thing. Like what? But I think it sets out the stall perfectly in terms of why, who programmed this? How can a computer have a speech impediment? You know what I mean? A lisp, as they call it in the show.
Yeah, and I also think it's interesting. I don't remember when the Next Generation premiered.
It was, funnily enough, it was around the same time.
Yeah, so it was the year before. So I do think that this could be a play on spinning off of the Next Generation's replicators. So they have the food replicators, which perfectly replicate food and anything they need. And the Red Dwarf version of the replicator is like basically a dumbwaiter that you can see working. You don't have any of the shiny special effects with it. You just have somebody on the other side of the wall moving it, which it is definitely part of the charm of this show, and the fact that it doesn't work either. So it's 3 million years in the future, but nothing works.
It's already trash. And it doesn't work anyway. So there's a very brief appearance in this episode of a thing called Talkie Toaster. Mm-hmm. Which is, did someone say toast? And they tell it to shut up. Well, that appliance comes back, and it turns out to be an absolutely deranged machine that is utterly toast obsessed and will not stop talking about toast.
And I feel like I feel like the fan reaction to Talkie Toaster is either he is one of your favorite characters or you absolutely hate him.
It can kind of be both in this world, where a lot of the humor does come from people being aggrieved by other people, right? It's basically Week Low. It's a story of people who should not be alone on a spaceship together because their personalities clash in such obvious and intricate ways that they will drive each other crazy.
And there's also a little bit of the fact, they kind of touch on it a little bit, specifically with Holly, but the implication is that all the, everything is AI, and I feel like it's almost a little bit more, more prescient these days with the increase of AI in everything that's going on, but the fact that left to their own devices 3 million years in the future, everything in Red Dwarf is AI, and they've all gone a little bit peculiar.
That's brilliant. In the same way that Midjourney or Runway ML, you can kind of create your own AI videos, and usually they'll be really beautiful, but then someone's face will split in half and turn into a flower, and a computer will appear next to their head, and AI, no, don't do this. I feel like that is the distant cousin of this vending machine in this episode of this show, right? We're like, you're trying, you clearly want to work correctly, but you are not. I guess it's a comment about the humanity as well on board the spaceship. Maybe we're all a little bit broken, just trying our best in the loneliness of space.
Yeah, and again, even just 3 minutes into the episode, whenever we get the scene with Rimmer by himself, he is very much we get to see Rimmer's personality on display as he's that's 6.5 minutes. That's great for a mile. Pity I was only doing the 300 meters. Brilliant.
He says, knock 4 minutes off for the conversation that he just had with Lister. We saw that conversation. It was 30 seconds long, max. So yeah, he's the extent to which this character can lie to themselves. Do you know what? If you're alone on a spaceship in the middle of 3 million years away from Earth, you are going to go peculiar, right? You've got to find ways of amusing yourself. For Holly, the ship's computer, it is giving Rimmer a beehive hairdo when he asked for a crew cut. But I think Holly also mentions in the previous episode, in the pilot, the reason Holly, the ship's computer, chose Rimmer, a dead man, to come back as a hologram to keep Lister, the last human alive, the last human company, is that their relationship is so fractious and so they're so aggressive towards each other. They hate each other so much that actually that is the best way of keeping Lister sane, is by keeping him in a relationship where he's driven insane, basically.
Yeah,
and
one thing,
his frustration will keep him on a level.
One thing this reminds me of, and I have I have started listening to your show as well, which I have been enjoying. I'm about halfway through catching up what you have released so far, and it actually reminds me of The Good Place. Have you seen that show?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So it reminds me a little bit of that, where they think that they're, and spoilers for The Good Place, the first season of The Good Place, but they think that they're in the good place and that everything is being presented as the best possible thing for them, but it turns out that it's actually torture, and I feel like that is, you could equate that to Red Dwarf and Holly. Holly says that he's giving him Rimmer because it's the best thing to keep Rimmer sane, but it's also quite likely that he's doing it because he's gone a bit peculiar and he is enjoying torturing Lister.
Well, yeah, he says he every single episode in the first couple of series, at least in the first couple of seasons, at least, he plays a prank. He's a prankster. He's pranking Lister, the last human. How scared would you be if you were on a city-sized spaceship 3 million years away from Earth, and the computer running the entire ship was constantly pranking you? Like, I'd be genuinely fearful for my life. I think I'm not sure I'd make it out of my bunk or my quarters, at least. I mean, that's horrifying. But yeah, they do kind of ease off on that the more they explore the universe and find trouble that doesn't have to be generated in-house.
And Holly does kind of go away for a few seasons as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is disappointing because I enjoyed both versions of Holly, and I was so happy whenever they brought him back. But even when they did bring him back in the the more recent seasons, he doesn't get a lot of screen time.
Very little. And actually, Hattie Hayridge, who plays the female Holly in 3 to 5, there's a couple of episodes like White Hole in season 4 where she gets a lot to do. But other than that, no, she's in the first couple of seasons, Holly, the ship's computer, was the exposition machine. Then they find Crichton and bring him on board as the ship's android. They rescue him and he becomes a regular member of the crew. But having a robot like that does mean you have a convenient exposition machine right there. And he's in the latex suit. Come on, let's give him some lines. Let's give him some I do. It's a shame that, isn't it? That Holly does get put by the wayside. She's there to kind of bolster the storytelling. But yeah, when either he or she have a gag moment, it's really good. It's always very funny.
Mm-hmm. And I think Chris Berry is Rimmer. I think it is interesting seeing this, going back to the first episode and seeing how he plays Rimmer here at the very beginning, which it's still very Rimmer, but it does evolve so much through the course of the 30, 40 years.
Yeah. Well, as it should, right? The rule of sitcom is nothing changes, right? Everything at the end of the episode is reset, so at the beginning of the next episode, everything's fine. It was the Seinfeld rule, isn't it? No learning, no hugging, or something. But yeah, that sitcom is supposed to be watched in chunks, and you don't have to have seen a different episode to understand this episode, all that stuff. But there is a slow. It was set across 40 years. Of course, the characters are going to change because the actors are going to change, right? Mm-hmm. So Craig Charles, who plays Lister, is the last human. He becomes more rounded. He goes through a kind of cool action hero phase and then becomes like just a good man. Whereas Rimmer, I don't know, he's despicable, isn't he? Like towards the end of this.
Yeah, it's like he becomes worse, but they do occasionally give him those little nuggets of sympathy here and there.
How good a performer do you have to be to earn that sympathy? It's one thing to, like, you know, he's had 17 episodes of being an absolute rotter to the rest of the crew, and like really dastardly, nasty piece of work. And then he has one episode where there's one iota, one modicum of sympathy for him. And everyone's like, oh, he's not that bad, is he? It's like, what? How did you do that? That's a magic trick. I don't know how you have an evil character. Marvel did it with Loki, I guess. But and maybe there's something charming about nastiness. You know what I mean? Gary Oldman in that film Leon. Oh, no, it wasn't called The Leon in America. It was called
The Professional.
Yeah, The Professional, thank you. But Gary Oldman, the baddie's performance in that's compelling. It's so much fun to watch people be nasty. Maybe because hopefully it's removed from most of the viewer's sensibilities, and so it's a bit of escapism to see someone that nasty. But he usually gets his comeuppance as well, right? He does the stupid thing, and he ends up feeling stupid about it, not least at the end of this first season. Any listeners wondering about this show and what on earth we're talking about could go and watch the last episode of this season for what I believe is one of the greatest comic performances, where Rimmer decides the best person he can share a bunk with is a copy of himself. And the arrogance, the ego on that decision, it backfires, because it turns out if you are self-loathing, then to actually meet yourself in life, like, yeah, sparks fly, fireworks. And some of the nastiest non-sweary language I've ever heard on TV. Like, they're not swearing, they're not cursing in it, but it's some dark idiom in there.
Yeah. I don't remember it word for word, but you know, the distended piece.
There you go. That's the famous one, the filthy piece of distended rectum. Like, how do you think of that as a writer? Like, do you know what he should call him at this point?
Yeah, and even where was I going with that? I think it also helps because, again, they kind of use a time-honored sitcom tradition where this is basically the odd couple in space. Yeah. Yes,
exactly. That's exactly it. Sitcom does that a lot, right? It doesn't. We've had a few guests on our podcast who've suggested that it doesn't have to be a spaceship. It could be an office. It could be a pair of guys who work together and travel around in a van. It could be anything. A workplace. It's essentially a workplace sitcom. The workplace just happens to be a spaceship 3 million years into space. Certainly for the first couple of seasons, right? Mm-hmm. Because there's not a huge amount of, let's go to this planet and meet these crazy people.
Yeah, and we haven't touched on the cat yet, and you know the cat is so fun. Danny John Jules, he is so great, and I love, even though he's not really developed as a character in the first few seasons, I love him as an agent of chaos.
That's exactly it. He is the agent of chaos. He's both the agent of chaos. He's also kind of the chorus. Because he's the one that can sit back eating the popcorn, watching other people bicker, and just occasionally go, "Yeah, I agree with him." Ha ha. You know, but he's extraordinary. What an extraordinary performance. Never acted before. He was a dancer, and he'd been on the West End stage and done a couple of TV slots. He's in the movie. Sorry, of Little Shop of Horrors. He's one of the three kind of backing dancers in the street there.
He's also in Blade 2. That's one that I always remember.
Is he? Oh my God.
Yeah, before doing this podcast, I did a superhero movie blog, so I've covered tons of superhero and comic book movies, and it always gives me a kick to see him whenever he shows up as one of the vampires in Blade 2.
yeah, it's that's kind of cool though, isn't it? It means you're not. Sometimes I get put out. Like, no, hang on, you're the cat. You can't also be a vampire. And I go in Little Shop of Horrors. Hey, you're the cat.
Although it's funny because he still has the teeth.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. But the vampire. Oh my gosh. I wonder if he even bothered taking them out. Maybe he just walked from one studio to the other.
But one thing that's one of my favorite moments, and I watched this a couple times. I watched it straight and watched it with the commentary on the DVD, and also I didn't realize it, but did you know that there's like kind of a bonus commentary for this episode on the DVD?
I did not. No, I know they did lockdown commentaries, which is very interesting. I don't know if you listen to them. You go on YouTube, they're on there, but and only a couple of thousand people watch these videos. But basically, the creators of the show just recorded a whole bunch of very, what's the word? Let's say uncensored commentaries for some of the seasons. Worth a look.
Yeah, I unfortunately don't remember too much from the commentaries because I'm a bit ADHD and I have a lot going on in the household. Sure. And so I've gotten to the age where it's difficult for me to focus on spoken word whenever there's distractions and there's no subtitles, and commentaries don't have subtitles. So So it was a little bit difficult for me to kind of focus on stuff because there was, it was just kind of chaos. I have a 2-year-old, I've got a couple pets, and
wow,
full house. Everything. Yeah. And, so unfortunately I don't have any good tidbits, but on the Series 1 DVD, there is also a bonus commentary, which if they have commentaries with the cast on all 6 episodes, and there's a bonus commentary with some of the producer and I think one half of Grant Naylor. I don't remember if it's both of them, but there's 3 people, but I don't remember which 3 people they are. But there's a bonus commentary on episode 1, and then there's an Easter egg on the main screen. There's it's you've got the play all, the select episodes, the commentary, and the subtitles. And there's a little piece of paper on the, it's set up to look like the bunk. And there is like 4 numbers. And so if you push to the right and it underlines those 4 numbers, and then it takes you to a number pad. And so if you enter those 4 numbers into the number pad, you have this like kind of animated conversation with the 3 of the creators that they had on the bonus commentary, and they are talking about this episode, future
That's so
echoes.
Cool. You don't get that on Netflix, do you? Wow.
Yeah, and it's basically like just a still animated image of the 3 of them, and then their mouths just kind of very simply are animated to their speaking. And then they also have, to add a little bit of extra motion, they have like, they cut between the wide and the close-ups too. But other than that, it's like extremely cheap animation.
Sure. I guess that's why it's an Easter egg as opposed to a featured special.
And they only, I think it's only like 10 to 15 minutes conversation, so that's why they didn't use it as like a full commentary, because it would have ended before the episode did.
Yeah, that's a little embarrassing, isn't it? Don't have enough to say to cover 29 minutes though. That's quite unusual to be aired in America. I don't know how they scheduled it on PBS. UK doesn't have a PBS, so just to say,
PBS doesn't have commercials either.
Right, okay, that makes sense.
Because they're publicly funded, so they'll like in between. So they have all like the commercials, which is just the if you want to donate, or here's what's coming up next.
Sure.
And then they would have like the big donate, like the fundraiser episodes that would be like hours long, and they would do it a couple times a year or so.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I've seen that parodied in American sitcoms, obviously, many times. But I don't think I ever knew it came specifically from PBS. But I think PBS does seem to be the route between the US and comedy from the UK. We had a guest on our show, Dulce Sloan from The Daily Show. She, just like you, PBS all the way. That's how she saw a whole bunch of UK sitcoms. Are You Being Served? Like a weird 70s shop set sitcom. and Red Dwarf.
Yeah, that's one that I definitely remember seeing ads for, but I never watched.
Yeah, I think if you're into Red Dwarf, it's unlikely that you're also going to like Are You Being Served.
And then one other thing that I was kind of surprised, even though like whenever it got to the end of the episode, I was surprised how I didn't remember it, because they do really focus on it. But I'd forgotten that Lister's twin sons from the future are named Jim and Bexley after the zero-G football player Jim Bexley Speed.
Yes, exactly. That's it.
Because at the very end, he does have the line, "Yeah, I always wanted to name my second son Bexley after Jim Bexley Speed, and I wanted to name my first son Jim after Jim Bexley Speed."
Yeah, it's a dumb joke. Or it's not a dumb joke. It's a clever joke about a dumb person, which is lovely. They do that really, really well. And do you know what? Earlier on, when I was talking about how a second episode of a show needs to set its stall out, needs to give the show a mission. Like, okay, guys, episode 1 is how we got here. Episode 2, this is what we're going to be doing. And I think Future Echoes lays that out. Even though it wasn't intended to be the second episode, it ends with this moment of, right, we've got to get back to Earth. And at some point, I'm going to have 2 kids, even though there aren't any living females left. And so how those 2 things are going to be achieved, whether or not they are going to be achieved over the 40-year run of the show, is another thing.
Yeah,
I guess the fact that it's gone on 40 years means you can kind of infer that one of them certainly didn't happen.
Yeah, and one other thing that I think this episode doesn't intentionally do, but I do like it, is we get a moment that shows that Lister is smarter than he appears.
Yes.
And he is actually technically inclined because we see him fix his robot goldfish.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. I think they do that a lot. I think, I don't know if it's like US audiences, maybe you seek more aspirational characters on TV, but I think for British people who have the whole colonial hangover and imperialistic guilt kind of thing from the Victorian era, affecting how we think about us as a nation of people, having someone who doesn't arrogate, who isn't arrogant with their intellect, someone who wants to raise...
Like Lister is smart and capable, but he has no aspirations, which they really focus on that on the Inquisitor episode.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. We just covered that in the show. Yeah, it's a bit of a kick up the bum for him, that moment, because it is. The whole premise of the show can be distilled into one sentence, right? And it gets to the core of what we're talking about here with Lister's character, which is, what if the last human was a bum? Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? What if the last human was just a lazy guy who loves Indian food and alcohol and beer, and what if that was humanity's last hope, and what would we see them do?
Yeah, and I think that's another just interesting, odd couple mirror aspect between Rimmer and Lister, because Lister is someone who is intelligent and capable, but doesn't care to put any of that to good use. And Rimmer is stupid and he is incapable, but he has the ambition and he has the desire, but he doesn't have the ability. So you have one that has the ability but no desire, and then you have one that's all desire and no ability. Yeah, that's it. And that's a really, really beautiful way of putting it. I'm going to take that with me, Bubbawheat. Thank you so much. That's it. I think if you put those characters in any situation, let alone a spaceship 3 million years in space, it's going to be funny. Sparks are going to fly. There is an episode, season 3, episode 2, Marooned. They, just Lister and Rimmer, so Kat and Crichton are elsewhere, they crash land on an ice planet. And it's basically, it's like a play. It's like just these 2 guys in a room for 20 minutes, bickering essentially, and then kind of developing a little bit of brotherly love, and then betraying each other horrendously. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. It's like a Greek tragedy, but defined by the fact that you've got these 2 characters that are so at odds in a room together.
That's the core of any comedy, and I guess all the sci-fi stuff is almost like decoration. It's not really, because we do question the things. And talking of sci-fi, this episode is strong in the concept, I think. Did you enjoy the timey-wiminess of it?
Yeah, we haven't even covered that part of this episode, but yeah, I do like how the time echoes get introduced, and it is, it's a combination of a decent special effect with a cheap and not very well done special effect with, and again, like, we have a repeat of kind of the slobbiness of Lister as he accidentally puts shaving cream on his armpits. And like watching it and knowing the gag, it is, you can tell it's kind of forced, but it still works because you can see that Craig Charles is doing everything he can to hide the punchline until the very end. Like, he can't even pull the shaving cream can out of his shirt before he grabs the can of deodorant to spray it to realize that he's gotten them backwards.
Again, this guy was a beat poet, Craig Charles. He's a beat poet and a stand-up comedian, and he toured with punk bands, warming up for them, things like that. He'd not done this. He'd not done any acting before. And I think several times in this episode, he is called on by the director to do stuff that a person would not do for the sake of the comedy. And he gives it a go. So yeah, no one has ever applied deodorant by putting their hand all the way up their shirt, applying it to one armpit, then with the other hand reaching for something else and getting on with a different chore while you've still got, like, no, that's not how it's going to work. And
and you would definitely immediately notice the difference, and like you would feel the shaving cream pushing up against your shirt. They have different sounds too.
Absolutely.
The deodorant is the tss, and then the shaving cream would be the
yeah. So you'd feel it instantaneously. I guess, are they implying that Lister just isn't as sensitive? Like he's the only human being in the world or in the universe that could have a bunch of shaving cream up his t-shirt and he wouldn't notice because he's that disgusting. He's that much of a slob. But it's the next bit that really gets me. It's the moment where he cuts himself shaving and sees himself in the mirror in the future, cutting himself shaving. So, sorry, I put that out of order. He sees himself first, obviously, in the future, cutting himself shaving.
Yeah, and that's actually the special effect that I was talking about. Because the future reflection, I think, is done really well.
Yeah,
it looks great. Yeah. But the blood effect with the razor, the fake razor, that is very cheap.
Well, again, he's got to do it himself. Craig is doing all of this stuff himself. So he's clearly.
And one thing that I did actually remember
down on
from
that razor with the effect.
Yeah. One thing that I do remember from the commentary, the cast commentary, is he talked about how that effect didn't really work very well.
Yeah.
And he even like comments on it. It's like, but he was basically saying that the prop didn't work very well either.
Yeah, and I mean, this is his second half hour of TV experience, acting experience, and you can see it. You can see it, but a charming sitcom, you can forgive the technical faults in favor of the gags, maybe. But for me, it was the moment that if I saw myself 30 seconds in the future cutting myself shaving in the mirror, my reaction would not be to carry on shaving. It would be to run to my nearest church and to try to find someone to exercise my house, right? Like, he's quite cool about it. I'm like,
or call Holly to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, Holly! And then he just carries on shaving. And then he cuts himself and goes, oh, hang on. Yeah, but that is our first clue that time is off. Interesting, I think, I don't want to read too much into it, but I think in the writing there's a lot of sowing the seeds. Rob Grant and Doug Naylor, the writers of this show, they're very good at sowing the ideas of certain things in your head. For example, Rimmer talking about the timing of his run that we've already gone on. He runs into his quarters, he goes, time, stop, and then talks about time and timing and how
and every time
that time and
lies. And every time that Holly comes up in the first couple times, he says what time it is.
Yes, right. So yeah, there's I like that stuff. it's probably not that hard to do if you know to do it. Like you finish the script and go, right, now we have to go back to page 1 and 2 to kind of start soaking in some fun, clever stuff to get the audience subconsciously on our side for this next crazy bit of story.
Yeah, and then the scene, and this is kind of what I think of as like the most time loop scene in this episode, which I think is fantastic, is the conversation with Lister and Rimmer in the drive room, where he's talking, where Lister is unknowingly talking to the echo of Rimmer. And so Rimmer is having one half of a conversation that is completely different than Lister's half of the conversation, and he's trying to make sense of it. And it is so fantastic, and this kind of really showcases Chris Berry. Like, I didn't go back and rewatch this scene multiple times, but Chris Berry's timing feels so spot on, giving the exact same performance 2 times in a row.
It's incredible. I think that's the best special effect in this episode. Is his ability to hit those exact marks, to have those exact eye lines. I do wonder how much they went through it with the director, to kind of, maybe there were dots on the walls that he could look at, but I really don't think so. I don't think they had a huge amount of time to film these shows. So I think it was kind of one and done, but he is amazing. Maybe that's unfair. He has been one of the UK's greatest comic performers based on this character. Like he it's technically so precise, but also so, I don't really quite know how you can have so much bubbling under the surface, so much rage, so much self-loathing, so much unfettered ambition, and combined with uselessness under the surface, but everything he's doing on the surface is technically flawless as well. Yeah, it's an amazing scene. It's an amazing bit of writing as well, right?
Yeah, because it works so well having, Rimmer's half of the conversation not make sense, but Lister's half of the conversation is what makes it funny. And then the second time around, everything that Rimmer's going to say, and Lister's half of the conversation is almost funnier because you know what Rimmer's going to say. And because it just works so well with what you know is coming, and then it ends with this, and just shake your head and walk away.
Yeah. So I maybe I've overthought this, but I think I think it's an incredible time loop scene. I'm sorry to your listeners, because it's very hard to explain what actually happens in this scene. You've already said it. It's the same scene played out with one person doing the same thing, but the other person doing something different each time. Yep, still doesn't make sense, does it? But it's amazing. And I think it's a microcosmic story, that scene, about fate and determinism. Because as you say, at the start of that conversation, the second take of the conversation, it's complete chaos. Lister's saying, we've just had this conversation. Rimmer's going, what are you talking about? No, we haven't. I've just come in. And then Lister starts kind of preempting what Rimmer's about to say. And as you say, by the end of the conversation, it's already determined what Rimmer's... Yeah. He's controlling it, exactly. Lister is kind of controlling what Rimmer's saying. You said it sounds like deja vu. Well, it does sound like deja vu. Well, go on, then walk out shaking your head. And he walks out shaking his head. It goes from Lister going, I don't know what's happened, to kind of going, okay, I'm going to manipulate this, to controlling the conversation. I think that's... Again, maybe I'm being very pretentious here, but I feel like that scene is a 2-minute story about fate and determinism and taking your own.
It's definitely like the fatalistic theory of time loops. Like in an earlier season, I kind of did a whole season of 3 movies that really build on that style of time loops and time travel.
Right.
Triangle, Time Crimes, and kind of the lesser known one. There's one called Time Loop that was from 2020. That's most people hadn't. I mean, they're all kind of smaller cult movies, but I think more people have heard of Triangle, and Time Crimes is also a well-regarded one. But if you haven't heard of those or seen those are well, 2 out of 3 of them are fantastic movies. Time Loop is okay. It's kind of the more lower budget, more comedic, but Triangle is a kind of a horror thriller take on this fatalistic determinism theory of time travel and time loops and time.
It's one of my
crimes.
favorite films. Triangle is so good. When she keeps trying to break the loop, and then discovers that all she's done is entertain the loop, to continue to manifest the loop. And just again, it's a performance thing. That actor is so good at displaying her grief at the fact that she's
Melissa
just,
George.
oh God, I'm trying to stop it happening, and I'm making it happen. It's such a good movie. It's such a good movie. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, have you seen Time Crimes?
I mean, it rings a bell. Is it 80s? Early 90s?
I think it's either 90s or late 90s, early 2000s.
Oh, okay.
I believe it's Spanish language. It's,
yes, now it rings a bell.
Nacho Vigalondo.
Right. Do you know what? I reckon I might have seen it when it came out, but I couldn't tell you anything about it right now. But I'm pretty sure. Time Crimes, frankly, that's the kind of title I would have searched out, right? I would have hunted that film down. I'm going to watch it. Time Crimes, that's for me.
The kind of image is like a guy in a trench coat with pink bandages wrapped around his face.
Okay. Yeah, again, that rings a bell. I might be conflating that with some other comic book stuff. Have you heard of a video game called Deathloop?
I have it. It's one of those on my big list of potential future seasons. Okay.
Well, I won't spoil it then. But I think, funnily enough, I went back to it because I hadn't finished it first time it came out, and I completed it this week, and it is a strong time loop story. Like, really, there's a lot of detail there. It's a really good story and a really fun time loop. It's not just, it's genius of a video game to have a time loop, because every time you die, you wake up again at the start of the level. And Deathloop, the video game, actually, there's a reason why that's happening. It is a time loop. But then if you start to, it's a very different thing watching a show with a time loop and actually playing a video game with a time loop, because if you're playing it, you start to understand the time loop yourself. You understand what you can do in a world that keeps repeating itself. And actually, you can get guns and get more bullets and get more powers, but actually the thing that's going to help you win the game is information. And each loop, if you can just understand the world a bit better and how to navigate through it. Anyway, I said no spoilers, and then I talked back for 5 minutes. Sorry about that.
That's all right. And, really the kind of the last bits of this episode that we probably should touch on before we kind of finish up is the whole twin babies and old Lister. And, I guess old Lister is first. And I do love this we get a lot of information in a little bit of time, because we see that, his hand is missing and he has the robotic hand.
Yeah.
And he says that he's 117 years old. So, that Lister is theoretically going to be very long-lived. And then we find out that it was actually one of his twin sons, Bexley, is the one that died. And, a lot of stuff I see that, Lister takes that very well. That finding that his son is going to die a horrific death.
It's a really tricky thing, isn't it? Well, he's not a parent, but as a parent, you'd go, I'd rather I died than my child. That's kind of the contract when you have a kid, right? But he hasn't had the kid yet, so it's like, cool, it's him dying, not me. I live to be over 100, and I live to come back in time just to insult Rimmer to his face, which is amazing.
Which I know I could not remember I couldn't remember a conversation that happened 90 years ago. And the logistics of this is ridiculous, and he wouldn't know exactly when in time he was as 117, unless unless they would have added it's just my birthday and it's this time o'clock.
Well, yeah, or Lister has an enormous notebook filled with all the times and dates that he's going to have to attend to make sure that he does all the looping back that he needs to do, because not just in this episode, there's a lot of stuff. There's alternates. Luckily they don't play around too much with multiverse stuff, because I think multiverse plus time loop starts to get very vague and very it's not a great overlap, those two tropes, I don't think.
Although I do, I think the clear explanation for Red Dwarf's inconsistencies is the multiverse, but they just never comment on it in the show. Yeah.
It's amazing the rules they set up for themselves that I'm sure they were desperate to break by like season 2. There's no aliens in this show.
Mm-hmm.
But they will go to a different planet and meet Gelfs, genetically engineered life forms. So they kind of are aliens, but just they wanted the universe to be sparse and Spartan and empty. And so the only stuff in space is stuff that humans from Earth have created.
There's not aliens, but there are alien things.
Yes, quite. So the final moment in this episode is as you said, he's carrying 2 boys, and they're 2 sons, and there are no women, not just on board, but in the universe.
And that also has a great moment of whenever they talk about like, how am I going to have 2 sons? And then the 3 of them, Lister, Rim, and Cat, just have a moment where they just look at each other. And there's that 2-second beat, and that's just so perfect and of its time too.
Yeah, that's that. Do you know what? It's very of its time. You wouldn't have that now. It kind of leans almost into like
borders on gay panic.
Yeah. I believe the writers of this show are very liberal and left-leaning. But it is weird every now and again to see an artifact from that decade of comedy, They drop some language that certainly wouldn't be used these days. Which is weird considering they made up their own swear word with Smeg. That they don't do it for other stuff. But yeah, but those are negative things. This is an incredibly I still think it's a funny moment because of what they must, if you actually take it at face value and think about what they're thinking. Is one of us trans in the future? Maybe is what they're thinking. I don't know. My first thought, and maybe I'm too sci-fi, is, oh no, are they going to find some kind of womb machine and kind of circumnavigate the idea of having a woman involved at all, which I think would be incredibly dystopian and dark and horrible, and therefore in keeping with the tone of this show. Because as you said, he's already seen one of his sons die before he's even born. So
well, he didn't see it. Rimmer did.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
And again, that's just another fantastic bit of commentary where he's like, where they have the conversation of, he says, "Brace yourself. I just saw you die." And it's like, and they have the conversation. You didn't give me a time to brace yourself.
I gave you ample bracing time. Yeah.
I just had a horrible experience. I just saw you die.
Yeah, that's scary. How old was I? How old are you now? 25? Yeah, I'd say mid-20s. Like, yeah, there's some great exchanges here. And again, so cruel. Like, what does Lister do with a time loop when he's shaving in the mirror? He ignores it. What does Rimmer do with a time loop that he experiences with watching one of Lister's kids die? Immediately exploit it for cruelty. Immediately take it to Lister. I can try. Hey, I've been given a gift. The means to drive.
And another fantastic moment is whenever Lister is like plugging in the Navi computer to the main computer, and you have that insert shot of Rimmer just kind of leaning over and just has this extremely giddy look on his face, like
so much delight.
Yes, like I'm going to be delighted in what, I was horrified the first time, but I am delighted seeing it the second, for real.
Yeah. He wants to break out the popcorn. Front row seat for that.
And I don't remember if I mentioned, like, I know I was like intending to say it, but now I can't remember if I actually said it. But my favorite Cat moment is that Agent of Chaos moment where it's just like him going, "Dog attack, roar!"
So unnecessary. Set up right at the start, I guess, with the photos. Who's that guy? That's my grandma. What is that? Oh, that's a dog. He's never seen a dog before, but knows he hates it. I think that's a good bit of Cat writing, and it does turn into dog attack at the end. Clearly, he has no idea what he's saying or doing, but it's still funny. I think that's one thing about this series. I think in any different hands, these characters would all have slowly become friends and a band of brothers as the show goes on. Listener, they do not.
Yeah, I have come to think of you all as people that I know.
Yeah, that's really good stuff. Yeah, and that's 4 years in. He's saying that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what a lovely.
Well, and that's like 4 years in terms of like show continuity, but there's potentially even though like however many years take place in real time, it's theoretically more than that in universe time.
Well, I think if you're stuck on board a spaceship, there's only 3 people, or 4 by series 3. It's more intensive time spent with each other anyway, right? Maybe they did the whole becoming friends, becoming brothers between seasons 1 and 2, but then by the time season 2 started, they'd already fallen out, because how long can you spend alone on a spaceship with someone before you want to kill them?
Yeah, and kind of the last thing that I want to mention, just because it, tying it into one of my previous seasons, is oddly enough, this is the second time that I'm covering a moment where we see a Polaroid developing in real time, because I covered Memento, which that's the fantastic opening scene, and now we have this with the closing of the Polaroid developing in pseudo real time. I think both of them, they're sped up a little bit, but it appears to be real time developing of this Polaroid picture of Jim and Bexley, the twin sons. Yeah,
absolutely. It feels bold nowadays to put that into a show. It's just a single image slowly developing. And actually, do you know what? These days, maybe people don't even know what a Polaroid picture is. They'll wonder what on earth they're looking at. Yeah, it's a cool idea. I don't know how many other shows were playing with the format like this, where you can have a photo developing over the end credits. And elsewhere in the series, Rimmer literally pauses the end credits music to shout about it being a garbage pod. The thing that he thought was a pod full of treasure. It cuts to the end credits, the credits roll, the song starts, and then it just stops. It's a smacking garbage pod, and then the credits carry on again. Yeah, they're having a lot of fun with format, and yeah, what other episodes have you looked ahead to see have time loops in them?
Well, I'm clearly covering Whitehole. That was kind of the. Whenever I was thinking about it, and it's like, okay, I'm covering Red Dwarf. They never had a like Groundhog Day style time loop episode.
No.
But the closest thing is Whitehole, and then I just kind of, more or less thought about picking episodes that kind of do something interesting with time, and then on series where they don't really have any of those, then it's just like, I'll pick one of my favorite episodes, or, maybe I'll let the guest pick whatever guest I have for that series. So I know Backwards is another one, since that's playing with time.
It certainly is timey-wimey. Yeah, it's an interesting episode. That the concept threatens to overshadow the characters.
Yeah, and I think I'm not doing time slides, because I think that's the same series as Whitehole.
It's season 3 actually. Time slides, season 3, episode 5, and Whitehole is 4/4. I think have another look at time slides. It's quite an interesting time loop setup. That the idea of what you say to yourself as a child informing who you are as an adult. That's cool. That's time loop gold, isn't it? If you can't get to all of the episodes in all of
I decided I decided to do one episode per series. I thought that was a good timeline, and I think I picked one other one from series 3 instead.
Oh, it was Backwards. I mean, Backwards is the first.
Backwards.
So that would have been it. Backwards would have outweighed time slides, and I think that's correct. You can talk about. What you can say about time slides is it is a time loop, whereas Backwards there's some juice. There's a lot to discuss in that episode, I think.
Yeah, but thank you so much for coming on. This has been a lot of fun, and I'm really getting excited to go through Red Dwarf. Like I can tell the difference between last week's episode talking about Doctor Who and this week's episode. Like Doctor Who is fun, and I'm enjoying digging into that, mostly fresh. But Red Dwarf, it's like, even though I've only I've watched the first 6 seasons 2 or 3 times, and then I've only watched series. Yeah, I'll figure it out. 7 and on once. It's just so interesting that I can take these and I can see stuff that that makes me think of future episodes and past episodes, and I know this, like, I wouldn't say I know that this series front to back, but I know this series as a whole so much better than I know Doctor Who, and it's so fun revisiting this and getting into it.
It's I think there's an endless font of discussion, this show. It's really not bad for a late 1980s no budget sci-fi sitcom. The BBC hated it. They didn't want to put any money behind it. It took them years to get it on TV.
Well, and for ages there was there was no sci-fi comedy. Like there was a couple failed ones. Like I think there was a US one called Quarks,
Right.
which unrelated to the Deep Space Nine character.
All right.
There was a few other ones, but I think not really until 1999, whenever you get Galaxy Quest, whenever you get kind of a good sci-fi comedy, and now we have a few more. Like we've got Lower Decks and the Orville.
Yeah. Although the Orville kind of lost its time. It kind of became a drama after a couple of seasons, I felt.
Yeah, I haven't watched it, but I know it was introduced as a comedy, and then I think it became, like you said, I wouldn't be surprised if it became more of a dramedy.
It kind of, it tries to do a Star Trek thing where it deals with socio-political, ethical dilemmas, but the only difference between it and Star Trek is that the lead characters go, that's weird, to the aliens in the Orville. That happened. Kind of gags, which aren't great. But yeah, it's there's no reason why the two genre mixed together shouldn't work. Sci-fi, all genre should make you laugh at some point, in the same way that it should make you think and make you cry or make you concerned or engaged in some emotional way. Laughter is valid, and I think Rob Grant and Doug Naylor hide a lot of cool philosophy and psychology and sociology even in the texts for these shows that on the surface are silly, timey-wimey, wibbly-wobbly, cheap-looking UK sitcom stuff. Bubbawheat, it's been so cool. Thank you so much for having me. I just chatting about Red Dwarf for an hour and 20 minutes. I could go on for another 6 if you needed, but no.
Yeah,
have lives to
absolutely.
leave. Lives to leave.
And for people that haven't heard of you or your podcast, why don't you take a moment and let them know where else you can be found online?
This is probably going to be no great surprise to any listener who's heard me bang on about Red Dwarf for the last hour and 20 minutes, but I co-host a podcast about Red Dwarf called Better Than Life with my old friend John. The deal is that I watch Red Dwarf all the time, and John watched it when he was very young and hasn't rewatched any of the episodes since. So we're kind of getting through the episodes together that way. But we also, every main episode, will have a guest from the world of comedy, usually a stand-up comedian from Britain who is also a fan of Red Dwarf, and they talk to us about it. It's amazing insight. You get insight into how jokes are written, how sci-fi is thought up, whether or not it's any good. And it's a really fun time. So yeah, come and check us out. Better Than Life, wherever podcasts are distributed. Yeah, let's say with that.
And I am Bubbawheat, and you can find me on all social media where I'm at Bubbawheat. You can find this show, It's Time to Rewind, on all the available podcatchers out there. We also have a Facebook group, It's Time to Rewind, a time loop group, and you can join that and discuss episodes as they come out, and also have discussions or share memes about other time loop movies, TV shows. It's all welcome there. And until next time, smoke me a cuppa, and I'll be regenerate before breakfast next week.
That's great.